Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Crown and today we are going to have some more stories that I hope that you will enjoy. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now, without further ado, let's go! First story. Landlord tries to defraud us and ends up losing his visa instead. This happened a long time ago, but I recently found out about the end result and figured that it might belong here. If you've never heard of the US EP5 visa program, then don't worry, I hadn't either. From what little research I've gathered, this is essentially a program where foreign nationals can fast-track US residency visa status by contributing financially to approved community investment projects. I don't think that the specifics are that relevant, but feel free to add if I've missed anything important. So when my husband and I were still dating and first looked for a place to live together, we settled on a small townhouse. It was old and needed work, but the rent was reasonable and it was in a neighborhood we liked. The landlord had recently purchased a property but did not live there. It wanted renters to help pay for the mortgage, I assume. We found the house on a reality website. It had been sold less than a month before we moved in and still had photographs posted by the seller. This will be important later. We liked the place, applied and got accepted. We moved in and lived happily ever after. The end. No, but seriously, the landlord left us alone. We lived there for a few years, paid rent on time and never had issues. Until we moved out. We had to pay nearly $5,000 in refundable security deposits, and when we moved out, our landlord repaid half. We were confused as the lease laid out the steps the landlord had to take in order for them to keep the deposit. Central to that requirement, the landlord had 45 days to provide us with an itemized list of damages we caused, as well as the cost to fix each one. 45 days came and went and no itemized list, so we contacted them and asked them for the list. We received a mostly blank one-page invoice for $2,500 to repaint, remove TV mounts, patch holes, and so on. It wasn't itemized and there were no individual charges, so we asked for pictures of the alleged items. The landlord immediately got hostile and refused. So we filed a suit, and the landlord hired an attorney to represent him, and the attorney submitted an itemized list as well as pictures. We printed date-stamped copies of the photos posted by the previous realtor. The same photos were submitted by the landlord's clueless lawyer. The clerk overseeing the matter found in our favor immediately, because clearly the landlord had lied about the photographic evidence. The landlord was also found to be in breach of contract and was assessed triple damages plus interest, penalties, and court costs. Yay for us. But he didn't pay, so we submitted it to a collection agency. I don't really understand the particulars. We eventually recovered most of the final judgment, so we were just happy and left it at that. Until, unbeknownst to us, the landlord was an EP5 applicant. Apparently, the breach of contract, collection, and shenanigans surrounding the dishonesty regarding the lawsuit made it back to whomever was reviewing their visa application. There were other issues too, I'm sure. The landlord's visa application was denied, and he ended up having to cash out of his US investments and won't be eligible for this visa again. The final outcome was an unintended consequences, but I kinda feel like he got what he deserved. Next story. I got the police called on me for having handicapped plates when I was not disabled. Now before we go on, hold a hate for the full story. I lived 5 minutes away from my work by bike, so that was my preferred method of travel. We only had one car and my wife worked 20 miles away, so naturally, she would have the car. Rain did not bother me since I had a good rain suit, And snow wasn't a problem since we only got some when Mars aligned with Saturn. So biking was a four-season activity for me. Not having a car came to bite me in the behind one day when the education center I worked at had an order from Walmart come in and someone needed to pick it up. As I wasn't doing anything at the time that was terribly important, the boss thought of me. I said that I did not have a car and odds were it would be too big to carry on my bike. My coworker Danny offered me his truck and tossed me the keys. Problem solved. I was on my way. Now this was the holiday season and so parking was damn near non-existent. Danny had handicap plates but I wasn't disabled myself. I looked for a legal space for me to park even if it was out in the middle of no damn where. Now a common theme with Wally World Supercenters is that they are usually the store, a service road, several satellite stores, usually fast food places. The only space available was quite literally the last space there was before I'd have to be crossing the service road and parking in Dunkin' Donuts. So I got out of the truck and there she was. This was a decade before the Karen became a meme, so I just thought of her as nosy old bat, Knob for short. Now Knob saw my very much not disabled self getting out of the truck and ran up to me screeching like a handheld garden rake dragged across a chalkboard. She was hollering that I wasn't disabled and I shouldn't be using those plates, and how it sickened her that people like me stole spaces from people who really needed them. I looked at the truck that's all but enjoying a cup of joe at Dunkin' Donuts, followed by the long and slow pan towards the handicapped spaces at the other end of the parking lot, and said, "I don't see what the problem is." Showed her an ancient fertility hand gesture and toddled towards the store. Didn't think anything of it. I got the order and went back out to the truck. Knob was still out there but she was now joined by one of the Townsville finest. Yes, this knob had flagged down a passing police officer. An officer who was looking very much like he was wishing that he could have justification to tase this miserable, screeching mess she is. She saw me, raised her voice a few octaves. The dogs in a 5-mile radius must have been wondering, what the hell was that? And pointed me out to the officer. Now the officer looks at me with a look that clearly says, I already know the possible answer, but I'd not be doing my job if I didn't ask. I rolled my eyes and nodded with a look that said, yeah, I know. Do what you gotta do. He asked me to explain and I did so, saying that my coworker is disabled, missing leg, and loaned me his truck. I am not disabled, so I didn't park where I wasn't supposed to. Officer nodded and sent me on my merry way. I two-finger salute him, smirk and nobbed, got in my truck to the dulcet tones of her screeching that the officer's breathing was very questionable. His work ethic was in the toilet, and many more epithets. And I drove away. Don't know what happened to Knob after that, but I like to think that I upset her to the point where an A-type personality like hers wouldn't let it lie, and it made the rest of her day miserable because she lost. Oh, wee lamb. Next story. The time Uncle Dave nearly blew some kids straight to hell. A little background. My dad and his two brothers are former military. Going back to the early late 70s, Dad was in the Air Force and my two uncles were in the Army. One of my uncles is Dave in this story. My dad and uncles were shipped out at the tail end of Vietnam. Dad went to Germany, uncles didn't. My uncle Dave is a great guy. Helps people whenever he can, but he likes his peace and quiet. So he moved out to a very rural area. However, eventually the land around him was sold and after a few years houses started getting built. With houses come families. Families mean children, and children mean noise. And a lot of it. Dave's closest neighbor is within sight but is still a good quarter-mile away, so the noise didn't bother him too much. He would ignore the kids, and they would ignore the occasional shooting range Dave and his buddies would have in the backyard. But kids grow up, and here is the story. Several years ago, my grandmother passed away after battling a series of strokes. She had to be taken care of in the last year of her life, which my dad did and my uncles would visit often. It took a toll on everybody, but Dave, I think, took it the hardest. When she finally passed, the first person there to help handle things was Dave. It took a while to settle her affairs, but a week after she passed and was cremated, we spread her ashes on my great-grandparents' grave in a small ceremony. It was naturally a rough day, but at the end, Uncle Dave invited us all to his house to grill out and settle down. It ended things on a happy note, I thought. During the afternoon, we see a bunch of trucks and cars go down the road to the neighbor's house. We think it's a bit odd until my dad remarks it looked like a bunch of teenagers driving them. Sure enough, that was the day the neighbor's kids decided to host a house party. I remember it being not too bad at first. It was easy to hold a conversation and drown out the music even outside. We grilled some steaks and burgers, forgot about our sorrows. Then the sun went down. I don't know what the occasion was for the party, but after the sun went down, some of the kids came outside and started, I guess, comparing cars and sound systems. There were a lot of loud pipes and even louder music. At one point, I could feel the sub bass coming across the field in my feet. We tried to tolerate it, but after several hours of continuous boom, my dad said that he was going to call the police. My Uncle Dave stopped him and said they are just kids. I'll go talk to them, and went to his room to grab something. I could tell he was pissed. Dave walks out with his hip holster on, with his 1911 in it. My dad tries to say, "Hey, what the hell?" And my uncle just says not to worry. The entire time they are talking, I see Dave's left hand is in his pants pocket holding something, and he never takes it out. They come to an agreement, and Dave leaves his 1911 exchange for my dad and other uncle walking with him to talk with these kids. So they set off down the road. About 20 minutes goes by as I'm waiting on the front porch and suddenly I hear, "Oh no!" come ringing across the field. Then silence. It's dead quiet. I remember appreciating the quiet but wondering what the hell was with this shouting. Eventually I see my dad and uncles come walking back pretty briskly. When they get within earshot, I ask what the hell happened. As my uncle explains it, they all got to the front yard where a few of the teens were playing around with their trucks and asked to talk to whomever would throw in the party. This kid walked out and my dad tried to explain what was going on and asked if they would keep the noise down. Apparently the kids just laughed and told him to get lost, and after some back and forth my other uncle said he'd call the police if they did not straighten up. Then one of the kids made some kind of quip about my grandmother. And that's when Dave pulled out what was in his pocket from earlier. Uncle Dave walks up and pulls a hand grenade from his pocket, pulls a pin, and holds it up to the kid's face and says, "If you kids do not get your mind on straight, the next time you see this, it'll be flying through your front window and I'll repaint the living room with you and your friends." And that's when one of the kids shouts, "Oh no!" The main kid got everyone to turn down the music, and they put the pin back into the grenade and put it back in his pocket, and they all got back down the road. Obviously me, my dad and my uncle were asking him what the actual hell was he thinking, when Dave showed us the grenade and said relax, it's deactivated. And you know that look some people give that just tells you they are lying? Well, Uncle Dave had a look that made me want to turn and haul seriously fast, like a clown was screaming and chasing me. I don't know what happened in the following days as me and Dad went home shortly after Dave unveiled his recipe for soft-served dumbhead. Apparently Uncle Dave had pulled something similar to that in the past, albeit without the portable blender, which is why my dad and uncle wanted to go with him. I know the parents of this kid called the cops when it got out to them, but nothing ever came of it. Next story. He was a jerk on my ride for 12.5 hours. Flying back to Tokyo, I was on a full airplane. Long flight, I was pissed, but I tried to be extra courteous to the people in the seats on either side of me because it's uncomfortable. Usually I opt for a window or aisle seat, but because of a snafu that still hasn't been ironed out, my visas were disapproved sometime after I flew out of the USA and landed in Tokyo. But that's another story. I was one of the last on the plane and worked my way to the back and found my seat, 7 rows from the back. In the center seat, a lovely woman from Atlanta on my left and a grumpy old jerk from hell on my right. It's a good thing I'm slender because my row mates were rather robust in stature and it would be elbow to elbow. The woman got up and let me in and the gentleman by the window looked at me and said, "Damn it, it's already too crowded," and then turned toward the window and grumbled to himself. I got into my seat and noticed his shoes were where my feet should be. I asked if they were his, noticing that the woman still had hers on. He said they were and turned back to the window. Could I get you to move them so I can get comfortable? I did not want to touch someone else's property, let alone their shoes because, well, ew. His rotund girth couldn't reach them, so the lady got up so I could move out of his way. He grunted and he fished them out. He slid them under my seat and I said I was going to put mine there and he pinned down again and finally moved them under his seat, grumbling something incoherent but nothing complimentary, and staring darts at me. I finally sat down and had to ask him to pull my seat belt from under his backside. He said the damn it word several times, I believe. It wasn't very comfortable, but I'm a former military and 2 times divorced. I can't put up with being uncomfortable for very long periods of time. We're in the air, and he keeps knocking my elbow off the armrest. We get food and he pumps me when I drink, making it look almost accidental. I turn my air on because of the odor, and he turns his on and forces it as best as he can toward me. And no, I know I'm smelling clean. I close my eyes after the meal and he keeps opening and closing the damn window shades. It annoys the hell out of everyone in the area. He keeps adjusting himself in his seat, bumping into me, keeping me from sleeping. It was a continuous 12.5 hours of him being as discourteous as he could, without crossing a line where I say something or begin retaliation, like farting loudly as I bend and stretch my back. The woman and I, a grandmother to 7 and me expecting my first grandson late this month, had a number of friendly conversations and I wished her the best as the plane began deboarding. The man on the other hand, since he was by the window, had to wait for me to get out of the road to get his case. I, on the other hand, was not in a hurry. I had a 7-hour layover and had plenty of time. I allowed the 6 other rows behind me to get out of the plane before me, saying I had to get my backpack from the overhead. The jerk in the window seat said not to me, "Come on already," in a stage whisper, and I know I didn't hear him. I just kept smiling and letting the back of the plane unload. When they were all out, a guy who had seen my backpack grabbed it for me as he was getting his carry-on. Maybe he'd seen what the jerk had done for 12 hours. I was able to be the second to the last off the plane. He ended up being one of the very last to get off the plane. I almost hit him with my backpack as I swung it on my back. He pushed by me, disgruntled once we got in the jetway. He was grumbling about being late, and he was already huffing and all I could do was think, "It must be tough being a jerk all the time." And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.